Hi, friends, and welcome to the first episode of the Legendborn series. Today, in this episode, we are going to be talking about Legendborn, and we're going to be doing a full episode for just this book. So, I want to take a minute to talk about my process. I know this is one of the earliest episodes that you will be listening to when it comes to actual book content. And I hope that if you're here that you've taken a moment to listen to the context episode. So I don't want to talk too long or too much in regard to my process. So I do want to just give a little bit of added explanation, which is to say that when I started this podcast, I was really in the middle of a bunch of other series. And I really started liking the idea of doing a read along where I recorded more frequently throughout my reading of a book. Because what I found is that it is quite difficult to do a recording for an entire book. There is a lot of thoughts that you have that you don't necessarily get to speak on in the way that you would when you record in the moment after coming off of a fresh reading of chapters. And with that, I think you just can lose a little bit of the things that you want to touch on. So I moved away from doing one full episode per book pretty early on in this process. However, this book, I thought that I had recorded my thoughts for in my very, very early days of reading this series and of wanting to podcast. And it turns out that I did not. So while I have already done a read along style for Bloodmarked, and I'm going to be doing that for Oathbound, I did not already have this episode recorded. And so you may say, okay, then why don't you do it in a read along style? But I also find that that's hard to do when you've already read the book. So I am choosing to do more of a one style recording for the books at the beginning of the series that I'm coming out with and posting episodes for now. And so this is going to be the way that it will be for this, obviously, as well as Fourth Wing. And with Fourth Wing, I had to do episodes like this for both the first book and the second book. So I share this and I am honest about this because this is part of the process and this is part of the journey. So the last thing that I'll say before we get into the episode goes back to a lot of what I mentioned in the context episode. I don't really know what I'm doing, and I'm doing this for fun, and I'm doing this out of an interest. And every time I continue to come back to thinking about recording and sharing my thoughts on books and how I want to do things and how I want to share, I'm excited. And it's been a while since I've been in a place where the thing that I've wanted to do as a creative outlet has kept me excited. And I just want to continue to feed off of that. And I want to continue to leverage that while I'm feeling this way. And so, yes, that means that I am making compromises with myself about how I record certain episodes that I don't already have and how I'm starting off of series. And as you listen to more and more episodes and get to know me a little bit, you'll understand that that is really hard for me to do. I mean, I said that already in the context episode that it's hard to not have like a perfect approach where everything is consistent right out the gate. And there's some uniformity to it, but also to spend the time to go back and do it in the way to where it's all kind of similar or the same. It's not that I feel like doing that would be a waste of time, but it would only be for the sake of the consistency. And it's not that I undervalue that, because clearly I don't, but it's also not necessary. And I think a part of this process and this journey is me just being okay with that and knowing that if you just want to get content out and you want to share with people, you have to just get into it and you have to record. And so that's what we're doing. So I'm excited to have you here. I'm interested to hear your thoughts about how you feel about this episode compared to the read along style. What I really want to get out of this is it feeling a little bit like a book club where we can kind of talk as we go. But I'm excited about it. And I'm getting ready to do this for the first much longer series that is about 5 books long. So far, I haven't technically done a read along for more than just a couple of books because of the fact that these early books in these series I chose to do weren't recorded in that way. So it's going to be a challenge. And I think I'm going to learn a lot in that. And it's going to be a lot of episodes and a lot of content. But I hope if you're interested in it and you want to explore the series, that you can pick up those books and read along with me and know that by the time you listen to an episode that it'll be, a portion of the way through that book, and that it's like we're just chit-chatting as friends, talking about what we thought and felt, what we think is going to happen next. which is also really fun because then when you read more in those books, you realize obviously very quickly whether your thoughts about what was going to happen are true or not. So anyway, I'm just feeling really motivated and excited and interested in this right now. And I appreciate you all being here. So, again, please connect on socials. Please follow along. I hope to continue to see you again. And if, some of the series I'm posting right now beyond this may not be your style, then I hope maybe it either introduces you into something you didn't know that you may like, or that I can catch you in the future on another one for any books that I put out in the future. So, thank you all again for being here, and let's talk about Legendborn. So I came across the Legendborn series on TikTok in Book Talk. And so as I have been using the app, even just before I knew that I wanted to create content, I have so many saved book recommendations, which I'm sure I'll talk about a lot throughout this podcast. But I came across Legendborn in the series and became familiar with it. And while it falls into that fantasy genre, I still don't mind reading young adult work. But I was heavily into like the romantasy at the time. So I knew that when I started it, I needed to be able to kind of shift my mind. And especially if I was reading romantasy at the time that I read this. And so when I would have days where I would pick up Legendborn, I had to just reset my brain a little bit to not have any expectations going in, right? Because I think that when you're looking for certain types of things, it's so much easier to be disappointed. And I didn't want any of that and like those hopes or expectations to fall into what I read here. And so as I talk about this, we'll talk a little bit about when some romantic things happen and, how I was feeling at the time in regard to these characters. But anyway, Book Talk introduced me to this series, and I love it. I have really been enjoying it, and I'm very excited to read and record for the third book, because at the time that I'm recording this, I have recorded for the second already. I need to get into editing those episodes, and then I'm going to start reading the third. So very, very excited. But let's go ahead and talk about this story. So Legendborn is about Brianna Matthews. She is our female main character, and she is just in the phase of life where she is going to be going to college. And when this story picks up, she is basically doing an early college program where it's like you can go, I don't remember if it's a full year or just a semester, but where you can go early and essentially experience what college life would be, start taking classes and like learning things that then folds into what your like college career will be. And I think it is for, students who obviously are excellent students and really excelling. So she's our main character. She is an African-American character, and she is friends with Alice, who's her best friend, who's her roommate. And, Alice is a secondary character, but we see a lot of both of them together, and their relationship certainly is a big part of this story as well. So when you start to read this book, you're immediately, you get a very quick understanding of kind of Bree and where her head is at, because what she talks about early on is after Bree. And why this is so important is because the situation that caused her to kind of have like before Bree and after Bree is so hugely crucial to every part of her story through all of these books. And it's the death of her mother. When you are introduced to Bree, you are going through the situation where her mother has passed away in a car accident, and her father at the police station, like working through the situation. And then when you're brought into present day, Bree is with Alice at this party with some kids that are a part of this early college program and just like other people that they've met on campus so far. And Bree talks about after Bree, right? It's just like how she's kind of changed and the kind of person that she is after such a significant loss, and how hugely impactful that was in her life. And you get this sense, or I got this sense, that Bree is entirely different, even though we don't know before Bree, but you know that is what is implied, and that is what is intended with this after. And I think a lot of people can probably relate to that. When you have such significant loss, it is so defining in life and so impactful and soul crushing. There's no way to not be changed as a person. So, I think what I'll say really quickly is, yes, this is young adult, but the adult, heavy on the adult, because that type of loss and talking about it and how impactful this is in her story. Unfortunately, I think many people can relate. I also think many young people may be able to relate. And I appreciate that as sad as it is, that is the type of experience that this character had faced, and that it's so present in everything that she does throughout this story, and that you really feel and understand how much it ties to who she is as a character and impacts her and like her soul and her thought process and everything. It's just, I guess I'm saying early that I feel like it's done very well so far from what I've read. And those types of aspects of her working through that and talking about the loss of her mother is something that I like in the writing style and I like in the character of Brie. So anyway, all of that to say, what happens rather quickly within this story is that when Brie is at this party with Alice, there ends up being a little bit of a kerfuffle, and she's introduced to this character called Selwyn Kane. They call him Sel for short. And what Brie ends up seeing amongst everything that happens is that some of the people at the party are like having a moment at this bonfire and kind of bickering with each other. And Brie sees a creature like above them and gets the sense that that creature is impacting the way that these people are interacting with each other, kind of causing this fight and this issue. And she's having this out of body experience because she knows that those kids there can't see it, but she's staring at it and she's processing it, which in her experience, she's never seen anything like that. So she's, her brain's trying to make sense of it. All the while, you have someone like Sel who knows that Brie shouldn't see it and knows that she shouldn't have any understanding of the fact that like creatures and demons and stuff exist. And so anyway, Sel and his like partner that he's with, who we come to know as Tor, fight it off, and then Sel like mesmers Brie, which we learn is a way that Merlins make people forget what they've seen. And she's supposed to go on about her way, but the mesmer doesn't work and Brie remembers. And this is like the beginning of an introduction into a world that she didn't know that she needed to know about, and that she didn't know would impact her life in such a hugely significant way. When Brie is back on campus, what ends up basically happening is she gets introduced to a mentor named Nick Davis. The school like assigns her one as a way to be able to kind of, again, introduce her into college and like help her get acquainted and familiar with certain types of things. And she really doesn't want anything to do with him and doesn't want a mentor. You figure out very quickly that she really is very independent. She doesn't want to ask for a lot of help. She's very fresh in processing the grief of her mother. And so I think that there is this strong desire to just like prove she can do stuff on her own, prove she can be at this school and be successful here and make her mother proud. And she's trying to figure out things on her own. But what ends up happening, I believe on campus, her and Nick, he ends up basically being like, hey, like I'm here whether you like it or not. And somewhere along the lines of them going through campus and whatever, they get attacked by a demon, a hellhound. And when that happens, Brie ends up at this secret society house that Nick is a part of, which is another, big introduction into this world and, the secret society. And Sel is there again, and she pretends to not remember, like, or as if she's meeting him for the first time. He mesmers her again, but she, it doesn't work again. And so eventually what ends up happening is she just decides that she needs to actually lean into Nick. This is the first time that she's been introduced to these types of creatures, and that the unknown, or what you hear in fairy tales and horror stories and whatever, might be real. And Nick clearly has a tie to that. And because the mesmers don't work, she remembers that and she chooses to lean in. There's just something there where she feels like, I have to pursue, I have to figure out what all of this is. I have to understand especially why I'm not forgetting. Like, she's really reading between the lines. So she seeks out Nick at the house and she confides in him. And this is kind of the first time where they're connecting in a way that isn't just out of obligation, right? From him like being a mentor, for example. She's like, I need your help and I need to understand everything that's happening. And I feel like this also could be tied to my mother's death, because when these mesmers are happening and when she's interacting with Sel, she remembers that when she was at the police station after her mother's death, that there was somebody there who kind of made her feel the same way. And she feels like this magical element and these magical people might have been involved. And so it sparks this passion in her, and almost like passion for vengeance and seeking of answers to figure out if or how it's connected. And so she trusts him and says, hey, like, there's some stuff going on, and I don't know why me, and I don't know why all this is happening to me now, but I need to know what's going on. And so he agrees, right? And thus they begin this friendship of confidentiality, because he's not telling anybody. They're not, it's just them. And so he's trying to figure out how he can incorporate her into this secret society, because she's not supposed to be there. Like, outside people can't just come in. And obviously Cell has mesmered her a couple of times. So it's like, they have to be very careful about how they're introducing her into this world. So ultimately what they decide to do is have her come in under the guise of like this process that happens through the society. So what you come to find out throughout this book is that this society is based around the round table, and there are scions of the round table, and there's 13 of them that relate to the knights in King Arthur's court. And when you are a scion, there are people who are kind of like dedicated to you. One of the ways that can happen is you start out as a page and you compete to become a squire in the order, and the order is the society. And the purpose of the order is to be able to protect the world from shadowborn demons. And so this secret society is essentially made up of Legendborn, people whose family lines become a part of the order to be able to protect the world. And the society is made up of descendants of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. So you have 13 Legendborn, one for each knight. And then within that, you have this network of people that kind of help and support them. You have vassals, you have squires, and you have pages. You have people that come in as pages that then can compete to become squires, which is a layer closer to the scions themselves. The Legendborn, who are direct descendants, are called scions. And so what you come to find out is that Nick is the scion of King Arthur himself. And so he says that like Bree is coming into the order as his page, and that she's going to compete to be his squire. And this is the cover story. She really wants nothing to do with this order. She just wants to find out information, and she's willing to like go through this process, because he says there's only one way. There's only one way that we can actually make this happen. And she's like, okay, whatever it takes, right? So as that happens, there is also this process where they end up having to swear an oath of fealty to the order to be able to like take in part of all of these things. Cell is so hesitant about Bree. He thinks something's up with her. He feels like something is off. She's shown up a couple of different times, right? Like he quote unquote has mesmered her. Like he doesn't know that it isn't working, but he just feels like something's off, and he thinks that she's a demon, because there are some demons who can take the shape of people and like inhabit bodies. And so he thinks that she is one of them, and that they're trying to infiltrate the order from the inside. And so he has a lot of aggression towards her and a lot of hesitation and a lot of doubt, but basically everyone's like, chill. It's fine. Like, just everybody take a breath. And so she like goes to swear this oath to the order and to Nick, and they fake it. And they fake it, if I remember correctly, because I think that Nick knows that she's not here to really do this, right? And he doesn't want to commit her to doing this. So they're just like, we're going to just kind of fake it till we make it, to see how long it's going to take to get information, because she may find information and the things that she needs very quickly, to where she doesn't actually have to go through everything to really, really be a part of the order. And so they're not going to actually really do anything. So they pretty much just fake it. But what ends up happening is you quickly start to realize that the scions can get called. So when their knights like call them, they go through this bodily experience. And the reason why they are awakened and they get called is so that way they can inhabit the full power. And that only happens when there's danger and when order itself is in danger. As more and more scions get called, you eventually get to the point where like the scion of Arthur has to get called. And that usually only ever happens when Camlan happens. And that is the biggest war between Shadowborn and Legendborn that there ever could be. And it's when so many Shadowborn are like present and attacking and in the world that the descendants can't ignore it, and so they have to basically manifest in their scions. And it's happened before, way back in the day. And so the fact that more scions are starting to get called means that shit is not going well right now in this present day. And it's obviously a big concern. So this is a constant thing that they're talking about, because if it happens and they go to war with the Shadowborn, if King Arthur dies, if his scion dies, it's game over. The whole order, like all of this is shot, because he's the top of the top. So the whole point of the descendants is their survival through their bloodlines. If King Arthur's descendant dies, he has no child, there's no one else who has his bloodline that can be his descendant anymore. And Nick is a college student. He's young, right? He's not married. He doesn't have kids. Like, all of them are children. They're all around the same age in college. So, when I say children, young in life, and they're starting to get called. And so there is a likelihood that if it ends up being a war, they may not make it out, right? So obviously a ton of stuff is at stake here. But that's another layer to this, because Bree's like, oh shit, like I'm supposed to be here faking it with the actual guy who's at like the top of the top. So anyway, as they're starting to kind of go through this process and whatever, one of the scions gets called and is awakened, and it's because there are demons and hellhounds and they get attacked. And, you're just starting to realize that there's a lot actually happening. You think, okay, it's just Bree and her bad luck and she keeps getting attacked by hellhounds and demons and whatever. But she obviously is drawn to these people in this world, and you're seeing these demons because there is a lot of them, and that's impacting the order and impacting the scions. And so she's coming into the middle of a pretty serious situation. And this is when she starts to meet William. And William is a scion himself, but his abilities is to heal. And so he ends up helping Bree as they came away from this recent attack. And he explains all of this to her, all of these different people, all of who they are. Merlin himself has descendants, because Merlin and King Arthur had a friendship and a relationship back in the day. And that's where Sel comes from. Like, his line is through Merlin's, which is why he is a Merlin and he's a King's Mage, because he's like oath to protect the scion of Arthur. In this case, he's oath to protect Nick. And so he uses ether, which is magic, to be able to like use his powers. And he talks about how the last time, again, this is kind of what I mentioned, the last time that the scion of Arthur was called was in the 1700s. And so people are getting really nervous, because already now in present day, 4 scions have been awakened. And that's like more than they've had in centuries. And so people know that a lot of stuff is happening right now. But as if all of this isn't enough, Sel still is very suspicious of Bree. He and her don't have a good relationship right off the bat. He doesn't believe that she's not a threat. He like tells her, I can sense something in you. And he like can feel and knows that something is up with her, and he can't prove it. And so, because she's like, well, I've fought with you, like already in these hellhounds getting attacked. Like, I haven't just let it happen. I haven't attacked you during those. I've tried to fight them off, and I don't even know what any of this is. How can you say that I'm on their side? And he's like, well, I know, I can sense that something is off with you and something is different with you. So where we are, if we take a pause, is with Sel and Nick, you have 2 sides of the same coin, right? You have the King Arthur's scion and you have the King's Mage. You have the scion who's going to inherit powers from Arthur, and you have Sel who has powers from Merlin to protect him. And Nick is, albeit serious at times and a good fighter and a good scion and strict at times, he's very soft. He's very gentle. He's very understanding. You start to realize early on there's a little bit of something with him and Bree. And then you have Sel, who's suspicious of the whole thing, who just wants to protect Nick, who doesn't like her. And there's a lot of animosity between the two. She is very spicy towards him because he's very hostile towards her. They shoot daggers with their eyes at each other, like not friends. And it's a particular type of aggression. Yes, you know that it's coming from a place of protecting, and he's sworn to do a duty to Nick as well as the order, but there's something else. There's something else there that you just realize there's such this aggression. And so you know that there's a lot more between the story with Nick and Sel and their history and how they know each other that hasn't yet really fully been discussed or talked about. But that just continues. He just continues to kind of be a pain in the butt. But again, remember, this is just one very small part of Bree's experience. She's supposed to be at college. So she may be doing this in her extracurricular time, but Alice doesn't know about it. Nobody knows about it. She also, she needs to go to school. She needs to do this early college career program. but her dad is really worried about her and calls her and wants to make sure she's like meeting people and socializing and is okay. And she kind of fakes through that, and he tries to just lift her up and whatever. But one of the things that happens is Alice too, also with Bree's dad, is like overly protective and worried about her. So there's times where she'll call Bree's dad to be like, I'm worried about her or this or that or whatever. And so ultimately she gets like a school therapist, and I kind of laugh about it because Bree is just in this place where she has these people coming into her life that she doesn't want. First it was Nick. The school assigned her this mentor that she's like, I don't need this. I just want to go to class. I just want to experience what I'm going to experience. And he ends up being quickly really vital to this story and to her experience. And then she gets assigned this therapist who she would rather fall off the face of the earth than talk to. She doesn't want to talk about her mother's death. She doesn't want to use anybody else to process her feelings, but she ultimately has to go and has discussions with her. And very quickly, this therapist, Patricia, ends up talking with her and saying, like, know your mother, and kind of has this approach of like, how much do you know about her and her past and this school and her involvement? Because Bree's mom went to this school. And so one of the pain points for Bree in her story is that she told her mom she got into the early college program expecting her to be like elated and excited that she was going to an HBCU and going to the same school that her mom was, and her mom like wasn't stoked about it. And her dad always kind of said, she just wanted to protect you and wanted to make sure that you were okay. But it's a raw feeling for her because you feel, or it comes across as there might have been some kind of disappointment or lack of support that she was having in Bree. And that was a hard feeling for Bree to process because it happened so close to when her mother passed. And so there's a lot of things tied up in this school and her mother and her feelings. So then for Patricia to be like, I knew your mom, and like, how much did you know, whatever. And she pretty much just comes out and tells her that your mother was a wild crafter. She can manipulate rootcraft, and basically it's another form of magic. And Bree's like, okay, this is crazy. Everything she thought she knew was already just, life was already a struggle. She's trying to excel. She's trying to find her independence. She's trying to process her grief. And she's quickly thrust into this world of magic. And then she finds out that her mother was magic, just in a different way than the people in the order. And so even more so now, she's invigorated to be like, what is going on? How is all this related? Is it related? What's happening? And so she just continues to go back to the order and go through these things they need them to go through and tell Nick, this is the right path. I have to keep going and looking and searching because I know this is the right path. And I don't think that she tells Nick immediately about her mother. She's holding some things to her chest because she doesn't know if she can fully trust him or the order, but she's kind of playing both sides, right? But she just continues to try to stick it out. And one of the things that you find out rather quickly within the order is that they do not like people who are not like them. A lot of the order is what seems to be privileged white people, and Bree is an African American girl. And so already she's like an outsider, and she's different, right? Because again, these are descendants. So every generation that comes from this line of people is going to roughly be the same. And so you get the sense that they haven't often had marriages and had children with people outside of their world and race. You just get the sense that doesn't happen a ton in the order. So Bree is certainly a minority, and you really start to see some of that opposition and racism towards her. And so that is discussed quite a bit in this book. And she is quite vocal about like how people treat her or interact with her or what they talk to her and what it's about, if it's in relation to her appearance, her hair, her clothes. She is not one to play, and she will be like, she takes no bullshit and she'll address it full on. But as these interactions happen more and more, it adds to the vibe within the order of them just being like, she's a type of complication that we don't need within this order. That's how they view her. That's how she feels. And so the struggle is very, very real, right? She's not going into this society with any different types of struggles than she would have in everyday life. It is present there too. This place, this magic, any of it is no different. It's the same shit, new day, which, unfortunately she's used to as a person of color, but there's more at stake with it coming out within this world because she wants to stay in it to figure things out, right? And to find answers. So she just has to reassure Nick that like, I know that this is going to be hard because he sees it. People see it happen. They're not hiding it. And he cares about her, right? But Nick, he's a white person. And so he can't really understand, right? But when he's seeing it happen and then he's knowing that like he cares about her and people are treating her like shit, he's like, fuck this, right? But she's like, we just have to keep going. So excuse my language, but that he doesn't want her to have to face that, but she's like, this is just what it is for me in my life. So there's a lot of those dynamics too, where they're figuring out each other, and he's starting to try to get an idea of what she experiences as a person, because he really wouldn't have any way of knowing that unless he's seeing it firsthand, or he has someone like her who's a friend that's going through it. So those conversations and dynamics are interesting to go through in the book and see how it shapes their relationships with each other. So here's where things start to really, really get interesting, is because she's now a page and she's supposed to be quote unquote oathed, right? If they want to continue to like serve in the order and kind of go, to the next level of like being a squire or what have you, they have to go through these competitions. And Bree's like, well, I want to do that. And he's like, well, you have never been trained in any of this. You don't know how to fight or whatever. Like, a lot of these people do this from the ground up, from the day they're born, because they know they want to be in this world. They know they're Legendborn. Like, they again, years of tradition and rituals and bloodlines that go through this stuff. And she's like, I'm just going to do it anyway. And so she starts to go through some of these trials. She finds her way through. You start to see some of her cleverness come out. You start to see that even though she doesn't really know what she's doing, that she's using her brain and she's working through things in the way that maybe she can't be as like physically good or great. She finds other ways to thrive and to survive. And this is where Bree and Nick start to really, really connect. And you start to find out a little bit more about him. And what you find out after she goes through her first trial is that Nick's mom didn't want him to be in the Legendborn life. She did not want him to be in this world. His dad did. And she tried to save him from it, and they took her away from him. And so he didn't know his mother, or hasn't known her or seen her for a long time. And his dad kind of forced him to continue down this path and be in this life because it's what he is supposed to do. If he is a scion, a knight of the round table, you don't really have a choice, because if you don't do it, then there's no more bloodlines that will continue, right? Let's just say that he wasn't ever a part of it and he never had kids out of sheer just objection to it all, then there would be no one else for Arthur, right? And so that was just never an option. And so she was taken away, and Nick's dad kind of forced him to keep going. And this is all that he's known. And, she kind of continues to start to trust him a little bit more, and they start to get closer and they kiss. And so this is what I was talking about in the beginning, where Bree and Nick have a very soft relationship, in the sense that he knows she's been through a lot. He knows there's a lot she's not saying. She knows there's a lot she doesn't know about this world and about him. But he wants to trust her, and they try to trust each other. And they have this secret, right? They have this secret of her being in all of this for this reason of figuring out her mother's death and not really wanting to be a page or a squire. But he's also falling for her because he's never met anyone like her. She's loyal, she's fierce, she's trying to survive, she's determined, and he's just so taken by that. It's just sweet. It's very charged because of the situation that they're in, and because of everything that they have to face as a group. But also, it's a hard situation where when you have that many emotions going, to kind of not find almost a soft spot for the other person who's your only confidant in the entire situation, right? It's bound to happen that if you only have one other person in this type of fight, so to speak, that you're gonna lean into them in a way, and you're gonna have some type of relationship forged. And there's just now has moved into this element of being romantic. So that's a fun little ripple. It's a cute, very sweet type of relationship. And again, the young adult part, where not a ton is happening here, but you are seeing some of that affection and some of that romance. So after everything so far, Bree still continues to try to connect with Patricia and go through, this process. And when she's talking with Patricia, she's trying to learn about this. Like, this root craft is very different than the magic that Cell has. They're not the same. And so she's trying to learn about her ancestors now, and what it is, how it works, where it comes from. Does she have it? Can she use it? Like, all of these types of things, right? And so when they are going down this road of kind of trying to talk to the ancestors and trying to like get a little bit of insight, she ends up basically getting hijacked, if you will, during this like vision that Patricia's trying to help her see. And she goes further into this experience where she's seeing a demon baby who was born, and she realizes that it was Cell. And so Cell is Shadowborn. And so, on one hand, she's like, holy crap, what are these visions? What is this type of experience? Again, she's learning about wildcrafters. They borrow power from plants in order to heal, but there's also this element of these individuals and people who use that type of magic or rootcraft that can walk with ancestors. And so she's just getting a lot of education and history about her ancestors and their power from Patricia, and understanding how it ties back to her and impacts her. And then also this very otherly world within the order of everything else that's happening. So she now has her red flags up the highest of high because of Cell, because she knows that like Shadowborn are bad. So why is Cell the one who's oath to Nick? And how is he a quote unquote good guy if she saw that he was Shadowborn? And so she keeps that to herself, but she really is like, F you, Cell. I know what you are. And she now is looking at Cell in the way that he looks at her, because she knows that he was up her butt about being potentially Shadowborn. And she's like, you are. How can you call me out, right? But she's not saying any of this. She's just keeping it to herself and letting it run her attitude in regard to Cell. And because Cell and Bree are at each other, Nick is not happy with Cell. And so he also, everybody's just kind of angry at each other. So the process of these like trials from becoming a page to from going from a page to become a squire continue. She has to go through another one, and Cell ends up, it's his magic. You find out it's his magic that are making the demons that are running around. Like he can use his magic to like create these creatures. And so he does it for the sake of the trial. And he ends up sicking one of them on her intentionally. He still believes that she is a demon and that something bad is happening. And so he basically attacks her. But when that's happening, they end up getting attacked by real ass demons. And so he has to basically then go into protection mode to try to protect himself and anybody else who may be out for the trials. And when all this is happening, Bree ends up again being in a situation where she's fighting a demon she doesn't know how to fight. And magic starts to come through her body. She basically manifests this intense flame magic, and they end up defeating these demon fox things. And Cell was the only one who was there and saw it. And he's like, what the hell are you? Because he knows that that's not Ether. And so he is the only one that has now seen her actually use magic. She's never, I think what you know in this book is that it actually has happened to her before when she's under real extreme conditions of like stress or emotion, and she's been able to always kind of just like calm it down and snuff it out. But this was the first time it ever happened in a way where her life was at stake, even though she had been in other situations where demons had attacked them before. For some reason with this situation and how close the fox thing, I think it was like actually, if I remember, on top of her and she was going to die kind of thing. That's when it came out. So it's not just when she's generally threatened, it's really when like her life may end. And Cell looks at her like, okay, you're not what I thought that you were. And she's like, yeah, I know, but now I don't know what I am. And he's like, well, I don't know what you are either. And so they kind of have this truce in a way, because she contributed to saving both of their lives. But he's also like, I knew you were different. I knew I could sense it, but now I don't know what this means. And he's eased because she's not a demon, but he's unsure. And they start to see each other slightly differently. They're slightly okay with each other, but Nick is pissed at Cell because he's like, why the hell did you try to kill her, right? So they have to go through that type of thing. But anyway, after all of that, she then, she's going back to Patricia. She's like, what the heck? I need answers. But when she's starting to have these types of conversations, Patricia starts to explain to her that that type of magic seems to be like a bloodcraft magic, which is related but different from rootcraft. And she doesn't mess with bloodcraft. And so she's like, I'm not going to help you. But at the time, I'm pretty confident still in all of her times working with Patricia. Patricia didn't know that she was in the order and doing all of this stuff. But what you come to find out is that what magic and ether that the order has is like bloodcraft, and that is in opposition to rootcraft. And so these separate types of people don't get along. And root crafters want nothing to do with blood crafters. And Patricia's like, I just like, we need to have a pause here. So you kind of are starting to see that there's two sides to this line of like Bree in the middle, trying to figure out how her mother passed and knowing the order has something to do with it. And therefore, bloodcraft and that type of legendborn magic has something to do with it. But then on the other side of that, her ancestral heritage and history is rootcraft. And so this is kind of the beginning of really figuring out how these things relate. So she gets to be at a little bit of an impasse. But anyway, she continues to have a pretty rough time. Not everybody is her friend. Not everybody wants her to succeed. Because what I didn't mention is that when scions pick pages, they squire and like oath to each scion. Being in that role to the scion of Arthur is a huge deal. And so again, a lot of people in this community of the order are like, who is this random ass girl? And how is she an outsider, and why did Nick pick her? Like, of all of the scions, that's the greatest stake that we have. Why would you pick someone who doesn't know anything about us, who's not trained? So people just continue to give her a really hard time, and she just continues to try to fight through things. But as this all happens, and as she is working through that, she's also learning more about Cell. The more she spends in the order, she learns about everything. She learns about Nick. She learns about Cell. And what she comes to find out is that when Cell uses his ether to the degree that he did, like in a trial, he basically becomes like ether drunk. So he acts drunk for a little while. And she ends up running into him, and he kind of confesses to her that Nick and his father, they could strip him of everything that he is. And if he isn't a king's mage anymore, if he can't protect Nick, if he can't keep people safe from all these demons attacks, if he can't do his job to protect Nick, because Nick has gotten hurt in some of these attacks. And it's not that he won't ever, but you can see that it's kind of his insecurity of like, if I can't do my job and keep him safe and I get stripped of being a king's mage, like I will lose my sense of self and my purpose, and I will lose my humanity. And that's so vulnerable of him to say, because this is kind of that first time where he's saying that I am something else, and that something else will take over if I don't serve my purpose, and that will be taken away if I don't actually uphold what I'm supposed to uphold. So he's very much in his emotional bag right now. He's very much doubting himself. He's very much like imposter syndrome, which is crazy because he's one of the best. So you're catching him at a very vulnerable time. But she sees him then, and then she goes back to try to talk to him later to say, look, she wants to now confide in him, to say, look, I'm not the demon anymore. We know that now. You can know that now. You feel confident in that now. Somebody else has to be. So let's figure out who that is. If it's not me and you know something's wrong, let's figure out what that is. And then she also kind of starts to confide in him about why she's there. Look, I'm here for this purpose. I'm trying to do this thing. Nick is helping me do that. But now I'm also invested in the fact that somebody might be like a weasel amongst your midst. Obviously, these attacks keep happening. Let us both help each other and try to figure out what the hell's going on. So Cell takes her to the house where Nick and Cell grew up, because this is where you start to realize Cell has been in Nick's life for a very long time. They ended up growing up together. Cell was separated from his family very early on and was brought to be with Nick's family. And then throughout that time, he just became this king's mage and was oathed to Nick. So they've grown up together. So he takes her to where they grew up, and they start to go through Nick's dad's stuff. And Nick's dad is a lord. So he's Lord Davis, because that's their last name. So as Bree and Cell are at the house looking through these files, they're also having a conversation. And Cell ends up saying that he used to love Nick. And Bree, I don't recall her necessarily being surprised, and Cell kind of elaborates on this, which is what I think Bree may have been picking up on as well, which is the fact that because in this world that they live in this Legendborn world, because Nick is the highest of the high in terms of being the scion of Arthur, a lot of people are attracted to him for that alone, right? And then when you add in the layers of him being good looking and just being the person that he is, it's almost inevitable for people to fall for him and have feelings for him. And so it's not that I don't think Cell is saying this as a way to like brush off the fact that he loved Nick, but I think he's saying it was kind of going to happen with how much time we spend together, and he, be training to be his king's mage and just growing up together. We had a type of relationship and closeness that was specific to being a Merlin who's oathed to a scion. in general, right? Like already to start, that's a lot. And then you add on the fact of like who he is as a person and all of those other things. But he also says he knew it was never going to become anything, right? So those feelings are in the past, but it adds this layer to understanding Cell a little bit more in terms of how much his care for Nick, how deep it runs. But also, I think, there's other layers of like he respects him as a person. It's not just that because of the oath to him as his king's mage or because he's the scion of Arthur and it's his duty to protect him. It's more than that. They were friends and there was other feelings that was there for Cell. So how he looks at Nick and feels towards Nick is a very high level of respect and loyalty. But what you also realize is, this is the first time that Cell is talking about, or in the book it's spoken about, Cell's sexuality. And while you're getting a peek behind the curtain, you aren't fully coming away with thinking that we know him entirely. There's more there because of just who he is as a character. He's a very complicated, kind of mysterious character, and you know that him and Bree are just getting to know each other and that there's a lot more to uncover there. So knowing this information about him really, while helpful and significant to knowing his relationship with Nick, you know that there's a lot more to come and that there's a lot that you still don't know and understand about Cell as a character and as a person in this book. So as they're continuing on looking through the files, two really important things ends up happening. What they come to find within the files was that a gate was opened back in the day at the time when Bree's mom was on campus and demons came through. And like they knew that, I think, from just like the lore of and the history of the order. But what you find is that Cell's mom was blamed for that. And so the order locked her away. And that's when Cell got sent to live with Nick and his family. And I think up until this point, obviously Cell knew something had happened. I think he thought, if I remember correctly, that his mom had left him, or that, I don't know what he completely thought off the top of my head, but this was new information to him. So he was really, really distraught because Cell's mom was a king's mage. So the fact that she had this oath and this duty and that she was blamed for doing one of the worst things that you could do, which is bringing in evil into the world that you're supposed to protect, he obviously was extremely upset about that. As they continue looking through files, they end up figuring out that in the cover-up for all of that had happened on campus, Bree's mom essentially kept a secret, right? She didn't tell anybody about any of this stuff. That's why Bree never knew about it. That's why she wasn't brought up in it. That's why they lived far away. Like it was purposeful that she was separated. And I guess to elaborate, if I remember correctly, Bree's mom separated herself from that life and from the college by choice, and she just kept the secret. And so went on to go live a life. But what you realize is that they also have information about her car accident and that they note that it was like an accident. And so two things are kind of true. The order and the people who are filling out these reports were aware of Bree's mom the entire time. They kept tabs on her, but they didn't intervene or just let her be because she was living a seemingly normal life and she wasn't trying to be involved and she wasn't trying to tell anybody anything. So she was fine. And based on what the information says in these files, there wasn't intention for her to die. Nobody was after her to kill her. It was just an accident that took her life. It's interesting because for as prominent as this situation was to Bree's story, you were figuring it out in the first book. You're not going to spend 2-3 books trying to figure out what happened to Bree's mom. It was seemingly an accident that took place, that took her life. And it's kind of the end of that chapter for Bree in figuring it out. She wanted this revenge for her mother's death and had vengeance in her heart because she thought that someone killed her. And when she got introduced to this magical world, she was convinced that something had happened or some relation to it is what had taken her mother's life. And in these files, while they were aware of it, it was again alluded to as just being an accident. And so there isn't really anything more for Bree to figure out here. There's no one to blame or to hunt down for that death. And so she too then is really upset because on one hand, her mom knew about all of these things, right? And lived a life of holding that secret and kind of holding back these parts that were a big part of her life and her story, to have this seemingly normal life and kind of keep Bree away from it all. And then it really was just an accident. And so she's upset, I think, for a lot of reasons. This whole mission that was kind of driving her, she has to process that piece is closed, that chapter's kind of closed. She has to process that like no one is to blame. And they both are having a lot of emotional information coming at them about their mothers. And again, it's this thing of like Sel's mom and Bree's mom were in this world and on this campus at the same time. And there's just this connection between them that starts to weave this relationship between Sel and Bree, kind of confidentiality, but of closeness and like emotional understanding, because of both having their mothers taken away from them in ways that are out of their control. From that point forward, Bree really wants to just lean into what her ancestry is from her mother's side and really learn about her root craft. She is pretty much at a point where she's like, that's a road that I want to go down and that I want to explore. But she's also really upset, and Alice can see this. She doesn't know why, but she can tell because she's living with Bree. And so she has Bree's dad come to campus, and he brings her a gift and he says, this is from your mother and she wanted me to give it to you when you were old enough to have it or at the right time. And I felt like maybe this was that time. And it's a piece of jewelry. But what ends up happening later on when Bree like really, really opens it and looks at it and holds it is it holds a memory. And within that memory, it's talking about her history and her root craft, and basically just encourages Bree to keep going. And so you know that it was always her mother's intention for Bree to know this history and understand, because she knew it was going to impact her life, and she needed her to be old enough and at a place in life to hear that kind of message. And this just even further invigorates her to really move forward and pursue information, but from her ancestors and her mother's history and lineage. So she starts to try to do that again with Patricia. And a couple of things happen at this point. The more that Bree works with Patricia and the more that she tries to connect with her ancestors, you realize that the more she's opening herself up to this power. And when that happens in one of these moments, Bree ends up getting possessed by her grandmother, and not in a bad way, but it's like Bree is cohabitating in her body with her grandmother's spirit. And because she kind of has these like seer-like abilities to talk to her ancestors and channel them essentially, she has to also be very careful to keep her walls up so she can't be possessed. And, she didn't know that until it had happened. So it just becomes very, very clear that her access to power and the amount of power and information that her ancestors want to share is very deep and heavy, that it can infiltrate Bree in a really significant way, more than people like Patricia or anyone else that knows about rootcraft and this type of work with ancestors has experience. Like, they can sense the power and they know that it's significant, and she's going to have to do a lot of work to kind of keep herself safe and to make sure that she can close off from it, because you don't want the ancestors to come in at the wrong time in life. Like, if it could get to the point where they're coming in when you don't want them to, not just when you call them or want to connect with them. So that's something that we know she's going to have to, keep an eye on. But also through this, she really just decides that like she doesn't need anything from the order anymore, right? She got the answers that she wanted. She can separate herself away from that. She's not too far to where she can walk away. They'll just mesmer her and they'll think that it works, and she can separate herself and just focus on life and focus on rootcraft and that path of life. And so she chooses to say goodbye to it all at this gala that the order is having. And of course she gets all dolled up and she goes, and her intention is to say goodbye to Nick. Thank you, but I'm done now, and I have the information that I was seeking. But a couple of things happen in this. At one point, Sel intercedes because Nick is talking to a bunch of people and Bree's kind of there, and so Sel ends up talking to her and dancing with her and basically comments on just how like remarkable she is. And this is the first time that Sel is speaking to her in a way that is flirtatious and complimentary. You really start to understand that he knows how wrong he was about her, but he's also, it helps that she's in this gorgeous gown and looking beautiful. He is seeing her in a new light, and he's all of the things, right? He's seen her use power. He knows that they've shared really intimate details in regard to their mothers and their past. They have started to have this bond that others don't have with her, including Nick. Now, I want to caveat something to that, because Nick too has had his mother taken away. Mind you, all three of them don't have their mothers in their lives. And so Nick can relate to her in having his mother taken away in a situation that was beyond his control. I think what's different is that the connection between Sel's mom and Bree's mom has come up a couple of times. There is an overlap in their paths that makes it feel more significant. And the fact that they were both there when they discovered sensitive information about their mother's histories and could somewhat comfort each other, or just experience that raw emotion in the moment, is different than going to someone like Nick and telling him something secondhand. And so it's not that his involvement is necessarily 100% less significant, but I just think that it feels like while Nick was the gateway to her coming in and trying to get answers for her mother and what had happened to her, that the importance of Sel and the types of interactions he's had with her, it feels a little bit heavier and a little bit more personal. So they both are playing a very important part in Bree's life and in this experience that she's had, but it is still slightly varied and nuanced. Anyway, she goes to kind of say goodbye to it all. She has this moment with Sel. And what I want to say about that is Sel, because he's a Merlin, he can feel and hear and sense things. And he can sense how he makes Brianna feel. When her heart races because she's nervous, or like he makes her heart rate rise, he can sense that. And so, there is this layer to where she's a little more bare with him than with Nick. And that kind of complements the point that I was just making. She can't hide from Sel. He can sense it all. He knows how he makes her feel. And she doesn't even know, she didn't even know that she felt that way, right? Until he's sitting here complimenting her and he's close to her. We do hear throughout this book, when she starts to first interact with Ether, there's a scent to it. And she talks a lot about Sel's scent. She knows when it's him. And she also can feel him looking at her. When he looks at her, her skin prickles. When Merlins look at you, that's kind of how it feels. So it's not specific to Sel, but just the fact that there's a physical sensation with his look, and then also that this scent, you very early on start to get very physical reactions, whether she likes it or not. And it is important, and I think it adds to a little bit of this, you don't know what this is going to lead to. You don't know if this is going to be something or not, or how this is going to go for her and Sel, because mind you, she has feelings for Nick. They have had this connection, they've kissed, they like each other. She's not trying to get into this triangle, but her reaction to Sel is involuntary, but he knows it, right? She doesn't have to tell him, she doesn't have to kiss him, she doesn't have to be affectionate with him for him to know her feelings. He can sense it even if she's trying to hide it. And so there is something very bare and vulnerable about that, stripped back, very raw, stripped back feeling that goes with that I think adds a layer of spice that I didn't expect. And it really adds to the dynamic in the relationship that you're building between the characters of Bree and Sel. So a little bit of that happens, and we're kind of really starting to lay the groundwork a little bit more for what is going to come for them. And then, of course, while she's there, though, Nick is seeing her as well, seeing how beautiful she looks, all of this type of stuff. And unbeknownst to her, he ends up saying, even though she's kind of had every intent of coming in to say goodbye, he ends up declaring to everybody, she's going to be my squire. So one thing I want to comment on that I confused earlier in this recording is that just because Nick brought her in as a page and because she chose to go through the trials to become a squire, doesn't mean that she is oathed or belongs to Nick. The oath that she was supposed to make at the beginning is to the order, to have fealty towards it and loyalty and secrecy and all that stuff, which, mind you, she didn't end up doing. In secret, they faked it or whatever. But any squire that makes it through those trials, any scion can pick them. And so even though Nick brought her in, I think a lot of people, families, and pages becoming squires thought that they were still in the running for Nick to pick them, because him being at the top of the chain, being the scion of King Arthur, the king himself, that's a big deal, right? So for him to then be at this event and to say that Bree is my squire, all hell broke loose. Everybody, because again, the attitude comes out about her being an outsider. The attitude comes out about her race. Like, it all just imploded. And so in the craziness of it all, Bree ends up getting snatched up, and you realize that it's Isaac who is the Merlin to Nick's dad, Lord Davis. And what you come to find out from him is that he basically threatens her and says, like, you're not worthy. You should not be anything to Nick. And we have been the ones that want Camlin to come. We want this power to come into our bloodline. We are calling demons now, and we did it 20 years ago because we want Camlin to happen. So let's take a step back for a second. The last time that a scion of Arthur was called was in the 1700s, which means that it didn't happen for Nick's dad. It didn't happen for Nick's grandpa. It didn't happen, hasn't happened for Nick. So they haven't actually felt or had the power of Arthur in Nick's dad's lifetime. And he wants that to happen. He wants Nick to fully have this power. And that can only really happen if a lot of scions are getting called, and if war is pretty imminent, then Nick will ultimately get called, as a lot of the other scions are. The second part of that is you realize that they blamed Sel's mother for the portal opening back 20 plus years ago at the college, but it was actually like Isaac and Lord Davis. So there is this betrayal because Sel has been in their family. They put Sel's mother out, had the order take her, they blamed her for everything, had the order take her, and then took in her child in whatever twisted situation that was going to be. And just, I couldn't even tell you why you would do that. Narcissism, I guess, to think that you could do something so cruel and so like break a family apart and then just take care of the child, bonkers type behavior. But you just realize how evil Nick's dad is. He's not in his right mind. He is doing things for all the wrong reasons. But what's key about this is, even though he's going against the order by willingly having violence come into the world and calling demons in, he's not breaking the oath because he's so inherently, truly to the core of his being, believes that he's doing it for the right reason. He doesn't know that it's wrong and that it's against the order. He believes that he's doing it because if he ends up having the scions be called and his son gets that power, that it's the ultimate way to defeat all of the demons and truly keep the order safe. So his delusion is so embedded into him, and he so believes it, that he's not actually messing up his oath because he thinks they're one and the same, like inherently, truly, truly, truly. And so what's important about that is because if you go against your oath, that promise and what you swore essentially starts to kill you. And so anyone else who like breaks that oath and puts scions in danger, or others in danger that they're supposed to protect by way of that oath, the curse, it basically that promise and that oath becomes a curse and kills you. It doesn't happen in Nick's dad because, again, he so inherently believes what he's doing is right. So anyway, you find all of this out in rather quick succession, and basically they have Alice. They kidnapped Alice and they said, like, we will hurt her and we will kill her. You are to say nothing and you're to stay away from all of this. You're not worthy. And they want to have her leave Nick and like not be a part of it at all. So she says that she will because she wants Alice to live. But then when all this goes down, Alice is like, what the hell's going on, right? Like, she obviously was scared. She was in danger. She didn't know who these people were. She saw the Merlin. Like, she's like, what the fuck is this? And Bree has to tell her everything. And of course, there's a lot of processing happening. But ultimately, Alice is like, all right, well, like, I'm in. You wanted to find out what happened to your mom. You're now involved in this world. You care about Nick. Nick's dad is obviously psychotic. He's in danger. Everyone is in danger. He's delusional, and like, I'm here to help you now. And so what's interesting to me about when that happened was that Alice, she wasn't a bad friend, but she was just the kind of this character that was always only around to like try to see if Bree was okay and potentially to tell her dad when she felt like she wasn't, and when her concern was high enough for her dad to like come. Right. And as much as that was all out of a place of caring, it was also a little just, there was some annoyance I had with Alice in the beginning. However, what I also can see is the fact that she was going on this early college experience with Bree. She wanted to have this time together. Bree has been completely, not studying for classes and separate, all these extracurriculars. Her frustration and all of that is also very valid. So all of those things, kind of turn on their head, and Alice, you start to really know and see who Alice is going to be now at the end of this book. And my understanding of her as a character and how I feel about her as a character starts to turn in a direction that I actually start to appreciate. So when this all happens, they basically decide, and in Alice supporting her, they decide to thrust themselves back into it. So they're not going to stay away. And when they go to the lodge, all of the like scions and squires, they're like, this is what's happening. All hell is broken loose. Demons are here on campus. It is intentional. We have to go find them and like keep people safe. So they all split up and they all go out, because what is ultimately happening is the Excalibur, the sword of King Arthur, is one of the most powerful things that they have. It's a magical element. Demons are drawn to magical incidents. You can feel its power, essentially, and it is on the campus. So they not only need it to just keep themselves safe and use it as a defensive mechanism, but it's also because they know the demons are going to gravitate towards it. And if they get it, that just makes everything worse. So now that they know that the betrayal is happening with the dad, everyone's coming on campus. They want to try to get Excalibur. They have to try to go get it first. So everyone splits up to make their way to this central place on campus, but via different paths. And the group goes through a lot of trials and tribulations as they make their way through campus and through the tunnels to go to this cave where the sword is. In all of this kerfuffle, Bree ends up realizing that one of the people that they're with, Evan, she can't hear his footsteps. So as she's been doing all of this training and learning about demons and all of this stuff, there's these demons, I think, called Grouchels, and they take the form of a person. So basically the person dies, essentially. They take over their body, but you can't hear them. And so when they're in the tunnels, at some point, she eventually notices that she can't hear Evan coming. And she tries to play it cool, but eventually it comes to a head where she's like, I know what you are. And it makes sense because Cell could sense a demon amongst their midst, right? He thought that it was Bree. It wasn't her. It turns out that it's Evan. So they end up going head to head, and it ends up, you come to find out that Evan is essentially possessed, or his body's been taken over by a demon called Raz. And he saying all this stuff to Bree and trying to bait her and like threaten her. He wants to kill her, right? And everyone is just kind of fighting everyone. Everyone gets to this cave. Scions and squires are fighting all of these demons, all of this stuff. And when in the midst of all of this, Nick tries to go and pull the sword, but he can't get it out. And when that happens, Bree gets thrust into a memory. So this is one of those moments where, for whatever which reasons, when her guards are down, it is so easy for her to get thrown into her ancestral world, which could be very detrimental to her, right? If she's not in her present body and she's experiencing a vision or a memory, she can get killed because she's not defending her present self. But for whatever reason, in this moment, she is given a memory. And in that memory, she sees one of her very first ancestors, Vera, who I believe was a slave. She was attacked by her master. And in that moment, when she's trying to survive, she makes a blood pact that says that she wants this blood pact to protect all of her daughters who can only live one at a time in their power. And so what that means is that when Bree's mother died, any power that she had transferred to Bree, which is why she's had these moments of having her power flare up, right? But there would have never been a moment where Bree would have had that power when her mother was alive. It's only one at a time that has this power. And so she now fully understands and knows that like this power has been gifted to her when her mother passed. She knows that power is present and truly there in her body for a reason. And what she also sees when all of this happens is that Cell's mom was there when Bree's mom died. And so when the power transferred from Bree's mom to Bree, like Cell's mom was kind of there to like watch over the situation, I guess. So you just, again, have this layer that even in the most intense moment, and like intimate moment of her realizing that she, this power isn't just a part of her lineage. It was literally gifted to her for a reason. And because of this like blood pact that her ancestor made, she's getting such important and vital information, and Cell's mom is a part of that. And it just adds to that connection. It's a small note in a larger story, but it matters. And so all of that goes down in a matter of moments. Nick tries to pull the sword. She has this memory. She comes back, and she then goes to pull the sword from the stone, and she actually is able to do it. And immediately she feels Arthur present around her. And you very quickly realize that Nick ends up being called in that moment, but he was called by Lancelot. And so Nick was never the scion of Arthur, and Bree is the scion of Arthur. And so in that moment of having the sword in her hand, all of Arthur's strength is then in her body and present, and she just like implodes, and they defeat these demons, and they're either killed or just cast away. And I get goosebumps even now as I say it, because when you read it, I will say that when I read it for the first time, I never had a feeling that Bree was a scion. I thought that she was going to play a very important role, and I knew that it was going to matter because of the magic in her blood, but I didn't know exactly how that was going to come to life. And I think because of the way that they shaped the relationship with the Order, and it not being a good entity, and the hate that they have for her being a Black person and being an outsider and all this stuff, you just never want that for her. And so it's just so far from the thought, at least it was for me as a reader. The fact too, she's a woman, right? And so they don't really talk about that a lot. Other people who are scions are female, so it's not that they all have to be male, but I think, again, you're not thinking a lot about that and the gender roles in it all, but the fact that it's a king and that she is the king's scion, it's just such an incredible moment in the book, and the way it's described and how fast everything is happening and how much she sees and everything that's going on. It's such an intense and impactful moment. And when it's all said and done, they're all sitting there. She's staring at them. They're staring at her in this cave, right? All of the scions and squires that are left. And immediately Cell kneels and basically bows to her, because he knows that he's standing in front of Arthur and the king. And it's, again, I keep getting chills. It's so crazy to think that she never wanted anything to do with this world and wanted to take it down from the inside and just wanted to step into her root craft. And she now, so that's the thing, right? This is a Legendborn entity and order and group, and they deal with blood magic and bloodcraft. She is a rootcraft lineage, which are not the same. And so now she has rootcraft in her, and she's Legendborn. And you realize how, I don't even think I realized actually in the moment how crazy that was. But it just, everything, that's why I think it just hits you with even more impact of like, holy crap, what is actually to come here, right? And of course, I'm sure at some point everybody knelt to Nick and all of this type of stuff when people had encountered him and when he first became of age to like be the scion and all of these types of things. But he was never called as Arthur. He, if he was called, they would have known right then that it was always Lancelot, but nothing forced him to be called. And so now that like Arthur's there, Lancelot is, because they're such a close duo in, back in the day and in history. And it makes what you're setting the path for is the realization that you have two types of powerful magic within Bree. She's not just a part of this world, she's the king. And that is why her and Nick have this connection, because Nick is the bloodline of Lancelot. But then what you also realize is that everyone's understanding of what was happening within the Order and who was at the top of that list just changed. And the protection of the king is like the utmost importance, because if everyone else dies and the king is left, then like this whole process of protecting the world and the demons will be hard, but it can go on. But if the king falls, all else is done. Like it's the end of the end for the Order, and there's no protection for the world from demons. So the safety of the king has always been the utmost importance. And now that's going to fall to her, right? And so anything too that Lord Davis was thinking about the power and about Nick has completely changed, because they are not at the top of the chain anymore. And so there's just so much stuff that kind of starts to swirl around in your head when you realize how rocked everybody's world just became. So when this moment in the cave ends, Bree like passes out. You come to the end of the book where she wakes up the next day, and you come to find out that like when she's assessing like where is everybody, what's happened, whatever, Nick was taken by his dad, and so Nick is not around anymore. And everyone is trying, they're trying to find him or whatever, because he's still one of them. He's still a scion. They know that Nick's dad is batshit crazy. They know that they need him in this fight, in this battle. They know his dad is the one perpetuating Camlin and trying to get it to happen. So they are looking for him and want his safety. But they don't really know where to start. They don't really know how to go about saving him. They don't know what to do with Bree. They're all starting over, right? Everything that they thought that they knew has changed. And so everybody's just in a little bit of a tizzy. But, ultimately, Cell is still there. He swears that he's gonna, figure out where Nick is. And he basically says, like, Bree, you're my king and you're my Cariad. And that's where the book ends. And what's significant about that is we know Cell takes his duty so seriously. And he already was starting to think that Bree was just this remarkable person in a way that he never could have thought possible, because he doubted her from the beginning, right? And so as he's gotten to know her, he realizes just more and more how amazing she is. And now he can't ignore her at all because she's the top of the top. So it will be interesting to see how their interactions and feelings continue from this point forward. But what's really intense about the whole thing is that Nick's gone now. And so Cell, he has to fulfill his ability and his oath to the Order in order to stay human and to not give in to the Shadowborn that's inside of him as a Merlin. And if Nick's not around, he can't really do that, right? They don't talk about it at the end of this book, but through how all of this works that it's all about fulfilling your oath and your duty. And so he obviously is going to try really, really hard to get Nick back, because that's part of his oath to protect him, is to go get him and save him and whatever. But there's this thought in the back of your mind of like, everything has changed and nobody is really safe. And like, how do we move forward from here? And this person that Bree was initially really close to and having affection for, Nick, is now not here. He can't comfort her. The person who hated her in the beginning is here and is comforting her, but is also pledging his loyalty to her. Because no matter what, every scion, every squire, like, yes, they have oaths in relation to each other and commitments to each other, but they serve the king. He's like, you're the most important thing now. And it doesn't mean that he doesn't have a duty to Nick. Of course he does, but everyone has a duty to the king. And him calling her his Cariad, there's meaning behind that, and that kind of comes to life a little bit more in the second book. But there's just a softness and an intimacy where you're like, what's really going to happen with Nick not around? How's this going to go? What is this going to do for their relationship here between Bree and Cell? Man, let's take a step back. There's so much left to do. This truly is just the beginning. There's so much left to uncover. There's so much left to go through and to process and to figure out. And Bree it's not that she doesn't have a lot to learn about her ancestors still and everything that came before her, but she can put that quest for her mother's, an understanding of her mother's death to rest a little bit. And she has this new mission now, which is to save Nick, all while also being basically the most important thing in the Order that she wants nothing to do with, that she has not sworn fealty to, and she's not oathed herself to them. So there's just an unsurmountable amount of things that could happen and kind of come of it. But I will just say, like I said at the very beginning of this episode, I tried to have no expectations coming in. I had never read anything from this author. I did not know what to expect. I didn't know how I was going to feel about going into YA material, young adult material compared to what I was reading before. But it really is such a good book and such a great series. And I have enjoyed it so much. I am invested in the characters. There's so much that I look forward to discussing with you about the second book, Bloodcraft. And really excited to, share the episodes and my thoughts about Bloodmarked. And I'm excited to see what happens with the third book, Oathbound. You'll hear me talk in a couple of different episodes coming out soon that I was going to have to wait for the paperback book to come out. It wasn't coming out till next year, until my silly self had the thought that I could just get the ebook. So yes, I'm paying for the books twice, but I want to continue the series and I want to be able to share these episodes quickly together and kind of be caught up in the series. And so I'm super excited to start recording for that, which I haven't yet. So again, I know it can be a lot to listen to a full episode about one book. There's just so much that I didn't even get to dive into specifically, but that's also why I'm really, really stoked for this, read along approach where it's multiple episodes per book. So you get a taste of both. If you liked this, I really hope to see you back for Bloodmarked, and I want to hear your thoughts about both. I want to hear about how you feel about full book recap. I want to hear about how you feel about the read along style that I'm starting. There's just so much more content that is to come. There is a ton of books out there, and even in the ones that I'm pursuing right now, man, there's so much ahead, and I'm excited. This is the first time that I've been this motivated and excited about what I can read and share with you all, and I really am looking forward to seeing what this journey brings and what kind of community that we build. So I appreciate you all so much for being here, for connecting with me on socials, for sharing your thoughts. I hope to hear about everything that you thought about this book, what you liked, what you didn't, what you look forward to, all of that stuff. And I can't wait to see you in the next one. So thank you all so much. And until next time, friends.